He thought he was inheriting worthless land and a pile of rubble, but when Marcus Hayes finally broke through the sealed entrance of that collapsed bunker, what he found buried beneath 40 acres of forgotten Montana wilderness was $275 million in Cold War cash and a secret that would shake the entire government. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, the kind of day that felt like every other day in Marcus Hayes's life, cold, grey, and repetitive. He stood in the gravel driveway of his rented duplex on the edge of Copper Ridge, Montana, mail in one hand, a thermos of black coffee in the other. Most of it was junk, flyers for pizza delivery he couldn't afford, a past-due notice from the electric company, a reminder about his son's school fundraiser. But one envelope stood out, thick cream-colored paper, official-looking, with a return address that made his chest tighten. Law offices of Stedman and Brooks, Military Estate Division, Washington, D.C. Marcus turned it over in his calloused hands, the same hands that had once diffused improvised explosive devices in Kandahar, the same hands that now fixed leaking faucets and patched drywall for $12 an hour. He was 38 years old, but he felt twice that. His left knee ached every morning, a souvenir from when his Humvee hit an IED outside of Kabul. His back seized up when he bent over too long, 3 shattered vertebrae that never quite healed right. And his mind, well, that carried scars no one could see. He tore open the envelope carefully, like it might explode. Inside was a letter on embossed letterhead and a second sealed envelope marked private and confidential. The letter was formal, stiff, written in the language lawyers use when they want to sound important. Dear Mr. Hayes, this firm represents the estate of Colonel Richard Emmett Brennan, United States Army, retired, deceased. The Colonel has named you as sole beneficiary of certain property and assets. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss transfer of said inheritance. Marcus read it 3 times before the words started to make sense. Colonel Brennan. He hadn't thought about that name in years, hadn't let himself. Brennan was the man who saved his life in Afghanistan, pulled him from a burning vehicle while rounds pinged off the armor plating, dragged him 200 yards through open ground to a medevac zone. Marcus had been 26 then, a combat engineer with the 10th Mountain Division, cocky and reckless. Brennan had been a weathered old operator, 50-something, with eyes like flint and hands that never shook. They'd spoken maybe 4 times after that day, brief conversations at a field hospital, a handshake at a medal ceremony Marcus barely remembered, one phone call years later when Brennan tracked him down to see if he was doing okay. Marcus had lied and said he was fine. Brennan hadn't believed him, but he didn't push. That was the last time they spoke. And now Brennan was dead, and somehow Marcus was in his will. The front door of the duplex swung open, and Devon appeared, Marcus's 12-year-old son, all elbows and messy brown hair, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad, I'm gonna miss the bus," he said. Marcus folded the letter quickly and shoved it into his jacket pocket. Go. I'll pick you up after practice." Devon hesitated, studying his father's face the way kids do when they know something's wrong. "You okay?" Marcus forced a smile. "Yeah, just junk mail. Get going." Devon ran down the driveway, sneakers slapping against wet pavement. Marcus watched him until he disappeared around the corner, then pulled the letter back out. He stared at the second envelope, the one marked private and confidential. His fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten note, the script shaky but legible. "Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't have much time left, and there are things I need to set right before I go. I'm leaving you something. It's not what you think. It's not a house or money in a bank account. It's a responsibility. 40 acres outside Copper Ridge and what's beneath them. The lawyers will give you the coordinates. What you do with it is up to you, but I'm trusting you, Because you're one of the few men I ever met who understands what it means to serve something bigger than yourself. Don't let them bury it again. Colonel Richard Brennan. Marcus stood in the cold Montana morning, breath fogging in front of his face, trying to make sense of cryptic words written by a dead man. 40 acres. Coordinates. Something beneath them. It sounded like the setup to a bad treasure hunt, except Brennan wasn't the kind of man who played games. If he said there was something there, there was. That night, after Devon went to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, the screen casting blue light across his tired face. He'd called the law office that afternoon, spoken to a man named Stedman who sounded like he gargled gravel for breakfast. The lawyer confirmed everything. Colonel Brennan had died 6 weeks ago, heart attack, no family, no other heirs. The property transfer was legitimate, already filed with the county. All Marcus had to do was sign the papers. "What's on the land?" Marcus had asked. "According to our records, nothing," Stedman replied. "It's undeveloped. There may be some old structures, but the colonel never disclosed specifics. He was very private about that property." Now Marcus stared at the coordinates Stedman had emailed him. He pulled them up on Google Maps, zoomed in on a patch of dense forest 40 miles west of Copper Ridge, near the Canadian border. Satellite view showed nothing but trees and rocky terrain, no buildings, no roads, just wilderness. He switched to Street View, but the cameras had never been out there. It was too remote, too forgotten. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. He had 100 questions and no answers. Why would Brennan leave him empty land in the middle of nowhere? What did he mean by "don't let them bury it again"? And who were they? Sleep didn't come easy that night. Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the duplex settling. His mind kept circling back to Afghanistan, to the day Brennan saved him. He remembered the smell of burning fuel, the weight of his gear dragging him down, the certainty that he was going to die. And then Brennan's face, calm and focused, pulling him up, pulling him out, refusing to leave him behind. "You're not done yet, son," Brennan had said. "You've got more to do." At the time, Marcus thought he meant more missions, more deployments. Now he wondered if Brennan had meant something else entirely. 2 days later, Marcus loaded Devon into his beat-up Ford F-150 and headed west out of Copper Ridge. The truck was a '98 model with 200,000 miles on it, rust eating through the wheel wells, but the engine still ran. Devon sat in the passenger seat, earbuds in, staring out the window at the passing pines. "Where are we going again?" Devon asked, pulling out one earbud. "To look at some land," Marcus said. "Land I inherited." Devon perked up. "Like, we're rich now?" Marcus laughed, a short bark of sound. "No, buddy, it's just empty land. Probably not worth much." "Then why are we going?" "Because it was left to me by someone important, and I need to see what's there." They drove in silence for a while, the highway narrowing into a 2-lane road, then into a rutted dirt path that barely qualified as a trail. The GPS on Marcus's phone kept recalculating, confused by the lack of landmarks. Finally, after an hour of slow progress through thick forest, Marcus pulled over. "I think we're here," he said. They climbed out of the truck into crisp autumn air. The woods were dense, towering pines and Douglas firs blocking out most of the sky. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of needles and fallen leaves. Marcus checked the coordinates on his phone again, then started walking. Devon followed, stepping carefully over roots and rocks. "Dad, there's nothing here." "Keep looking," Marcus said. They walked for 10 minutes, pushing through underbrush, until Marcus stopped. Ahead of them, partially hidden by moss and overgrown vegetation, was a concrete slab. It was massive, maybe 30 feet by 40 feet, cracked and sunken into the earth at odd angles. Vines crawled across its surface, and small saplings had taken root in the fissures. Devon whistled. What is that? I don't know, Marcus said, but his mind was already working, already recognizing the construction. Military-grade concrete, reinforced, the kind used for bunkers and command posts. He walked the perimeter slowly, looking for entry points, hatches, anything. On the far side, half buried in dirt and debris, he found it. A metal door, rusted orange and brown but still intact. It was angled into the ground like it had been part of a stairwell that had collapsed. "Stay back," Marcus told Devon. He knelt beside the door, brushing away leaves and soil. There was a handle, a heavy industrial kind, and what looked like a locking mechanism that had long since seized up. He tried pulling, but it didn't budge. The whole thing was wedged tight, decades of earth settling around it. "We'll need tools," Marcus said, standing up and wiping his hands on his jeans. "A lot of them." Over the next week, Marcus made the drive out to the property every day after dropping Devon at school. He brought shovels, pry bars, a come-along winch, anything he could borrow or afford. The work was brutal, his back screaming with every swing of the shovel, his knee threatening to give out when he crouched too long. But he kept going, kept digging, kept pulling away layers of dirt and rock and rotted wood. Tyler, his best friend and fellow veteran, showed up on the third day with a cooler of beer and a chainsaw. Tyler was built like a tank, 42 years old, with a shaved head and a beard he claimed made him look wise. He ran a struggling auto shop on the edge of town and spent most evenings trying to drink away memories of Fallujah. "You gonna tell me what this is about?" Tyler asked, cutting through a fallen log that blocked the entrance. "I inherited it," Marcus said, "from Colonel Brennan." Tyler paused, lowered the chainsaw. "Brennan? The guy who pulled you out?" Marcus nodded. "Why would he leave you a collapsed bunker in the middle of nowhere?" "I'm trying to figure that out." They worked in silence for a while, the chainsaw's roar echoing through the trees. By late afternoon, they'd cleared enough debris to fully expose the door. Marcus hooked the come-along to a nearby tree and attached the cable to the door handle. He started cranking, the winch creaking and groaning under the strain. "Easy," Tyler warned. "That cable snaps, it'll take your head off." Marcus kept cranking, sweat dripping down his face despite the cold. The door shifted just an inch, then another. Rust flaked off in orange chunks. The locking mechanism shrieked in protest. Then, with a sound like tearing metal, the door jerked free. Both men stumbled back, breathing hard. The door hung open now, revealing a dark void beyond. Cool air rushed out, carrying the smell of damp concrete and stale earth. Marcus grabbed a flashlight from his truck and approached the opening. A stairwell descended into darkness, concrete steps covered in a thin layer of dust and moss. "You sure about this?" Tyler asked, standing beside him. Marcus wasn't sure about anything, but he clicked on the flashlight and started down. The stairs were steep, maybe 20 steps, ending at a landing and another door. This one was steel, unmarked, with a wheel lock like something on a submarine. Marcus grabbed the wheel with both hands and turned. It resisted at first, then slowly, grudgingly began to move. When it finally clicked open, he pushed the door inward. The beam of his flashlight swept across a massive underground chamber. The bunker was huge, at least 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, with a curved concrete ceiling reinforced with steel beams. The walls were lined with metal shelving units, most of them empty or holding rusted tools and decayed equipment. But in the center of the room, arranged in neat rows, were wooden crates. Dozens of them. Tyler whistled low behind him. "What the hell is this place?" Marcus moved deeper into the bunker, his footsteps echoing. Each crate was about 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, stenciled with faded military markings. He read the labels aloud. "Property of US Army. Classified. Do not open without authorization. Dates from 1976, 1981, 1984. "You think there's weapons in there?" Tyler asked. "Only one way to find out," Marcus said. He found a pry bar on one of the shelves and wedged it under the lid of the nearest crate. The wood was old, but still solid. He pulled hard, and the nails shrieked as they came free. The lid clattered to the floor, and both men leaned in to look. Inside, wrapped in plastic sheeting that had yellowed with age, were stacks of cash. $100 bills, bound in bundles, each bundle marked with a paper band. Marcus reached in with shaking hands and pulled one out. The bills were old, printed in the 1970s from the look of them, but perfectly preserved. He flipped through the stack. 100 bills, $10,000. Holy shit, Tyler breathed. Marcus set the bundle down and pulled out another, then another. The crate was packed tight, layer after layer of cash. He did quick math in his head, trying to estimate. If each bundle was 10,000, and there were maybe 20 or 25 bundles per layer, and the crate was stacked 4 layers deep, that meant each crate held somewhere around $250,000. He looked at the rows of crates stretching into the darkness. There had to be at least 30 of them. "Tyler," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper, "we need to count these." They worked through the night, opening crate after crate, documenting what they found. The bunker had no electricity, so they worked by flashlight and the glow of their phone screens. Every crate contained the same thing, cash, bundled and sealed, ranging from tens to hundreds. Some crates held smaller bills, others only hundreds. But all of it was real, all of it untouched. By 3 a.m, Marcus sat on the concrete floor, back against a crate, calculator in hand. Tyler sat across from him, looking pale and shaken. "How much?" Tyler asked. Marcus stared at the number on the screen. He'd recounted it 3 times, certain he'd made a mistake, but the number stayed the same. $275 million, Marcus said, give or take. Tyler laughed, a high, nervous sound. "That's not possible. Money like that doesn't just sit in a bunker for 40 years. "Apparently it does," Marcus said. "Where did it come from? Why is it here? And why did Brennan leave it to you?" Marcus shook his head. He didn't have answers, not yet. But as he looked around the bunker, he started noticing other things. Filing cabinets against the far wall, boxes stacked on high shelves, a desk in the corner with a locked drawer. He stood up, his knee protesting, and walked to the desk. The lock was old, easy to break with the pry bar. Inside the drawer were folders, files, photographs. He pulled them out carefully, spreading them across the desk. Most were labeled with code names and dates. Operation Nightfall 1977, Operation Clear Sky 1983, Operation Silent Thunder 1989. Each file contained mission briefings, intelligence reports, photographs of men in civilian clothes meeting in foreign cities, and in the back of the drawer, a leather-bound journal. Marcus picked it up, felt the weight of it. The cover was embossed with initials, R.E.B. Colonel Richard Emmett Brennan. He opened it to the first page, saw Brennan's handwriting, the same shaky script from the letter. January 15th, 1992. They told me this facility would be decommissioned by the end of the year. Said all assets would be transferred or destroyed. But I know better. I've seen how these things work. The money will disappear, the records will be shredded, and the operations will be buried like they never happened. Men died for these missions. Good men. And now they want to erase it all like it didn't matter. Marcus flipped through the pages, skimming entries that spanned decades. Brennan had been the custodian of this bunker, responsible for guarding whatever was stored here. But the operations had been shut down, the programs cancelled, and the money allocated for covert missions that never happened or were scrubbed from official records, had been left behind, forgotten. One entry, dated March 3, 2008, stopped Marcus cold. "I'm dying. The doctors say I have maybe a year, and I still don't know what to do with all of this. I thought about going public, but who would believe me? I thought about burning it all, but that feels like erasing the men who bled for it. So I'm leaving it to the one person I know who has the integrity to make the right call." Marcus Hayes. I saved his life once. Maybe now he can save mine by finishing what I couldn't. Tyler appeared beside Marcus, reading over his shoulder. He left you $250 million and a suicide mission. Marcus closed the journal carefully. He left me a choice. What are you going to do? Marcus looked around the bunker one more time, at the crates of cash, at the files documenting operations the government wanted forgotten, at the journal of a man who spent his last years guarding a secret no one else cared about. I don't know yet, Marcus said, but I can't just walk away. They climbed out of the bunker as the sun was rising, painting the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold. Marcus pulled the door shut behind them, locked it as best he could, and stood in the cold morning air, trying to process what he'd just found. Devon was going to be waking up soon, wondering where his dad was. Marcus needed to get home, needed to act normal, needed to pretend his entire world hadn't just shifted on its axis. But as he drove back toward Copper Ridge, Tyler silent in the passenger seat, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just opened a door he couldn't close. Somewhere out there, people knew about this bunker. They had to. You didn't just forget about $275 million. And if they knew, if they'd been watching, then they knew he'd found it. Marcus pulled into the driveway of his duplex just as Devon's alarm went off inside. He sat in the truck for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe. You good? Tyler asked. No, Marcus said honestly, but I will be. He climbed out of the truck, walked to the front door, and stepped back into his normal life. But nothing felt normal anymore. In his jacket pocket, the weight of Brennan's journal pressed against his chest like a second heart, beating with secrets and choices and the kind of responsibility that could destroy a man or save him. And Marcus Hayes, 38-year-old veteran with a bad knee and a son to raise, had no idea which one it would be. Marcus didn't sleep for 3 nights. He'd drop Devon off at school, tell him everything was fine, then drive straight back to the bunker. Each time he descended those concrete steps, each time he opened that steel door, his heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to break free. The bunker felt different now that he knew what it held. The air seemed heavier, charged with the weight of decades-old secrets and enough money to change his life or end it. He started methodically, the way the army had trained him. Document everything. Take photos, make lists, keep records. He bought a composition notebook from the dollar store and filled page after page with inventory. Crate 1, $247,000, mostly hundreds, dated 1976 to 1978. Crate 2, $312,000, mixed denominations, dated 1980 to 1981. The numbers climbed higher with each entry. But it wasn't just the money. On the second night, working alone by the glow of a battery-powered lantern, Marcus started going through the filing cabinets. What he found made his blood run cold. Manila folders filled with classified documents, most stamped with warnings he recognized from his time in intelligence briefings. Top secret, eyes only, no foreign dissemination. Operation files detailing covert actions in countries most Americans couldn't find on a map. Laos, Nicaragua, Angola, Chad. Operations with codenames like Midnight Harvest and Silent Shepherd and Grey Wolf. Each file contained mission briefings, intelligence assessments, and most disturbing financial records. Money allocated for bribes, for weapons purchases, for paying informants and foreign operatives. Millions of dollars assigned to operations that, according to the documentation, were either scrubbed, cancelled, or officially never happened. And all of it had ended up here, in this forgotten bunker in the Montana wilderness, guarded by one man who refused to let it disappear. Marcus found photographs too, glossy black and white prints that showed men in civilian clothes standing in front of embassies, sitting in outdoor cafes, boarding planes. Some faces were crossed out with red marker. Others had names written on the back in careful handwriting. The dates ranged from the late 1960s through the early 90s. The Cold War, documented in images of shadows and secrets. He sat on the concrete floor, surrounded by evidence of things his government had done and then tried to erase, and felt something close to vertigo. This wasn't just money. This was proof of illegal operations, of funds misappropriated, and missions conducted outside congressional oversight. This was the kind of thing that destroyed careers, that triggered investigations, that made powerful people very dangerous. On the third night, Marcus finally opened Colonel Brennan's journal properly and started reading from the beginning. The first entry was dated April 7, 1974, just after Brennan had been assigned to what the records called Facility 7-Charlie, a remote storage site for sensitive materials. His orders were simple: maintain security, keep records, report quarterly to a handler whose name was redacted in every document Marcus found. But as the entries progressed, Brennan's tone shifted from dutiful soldier to troubled witness. He wrote about deliveries of cash in the middle of the night, sealed crates he wasn't allowed to open, visits from men in unmarked cars who never gave their names. He wrote about operations he heard whispers of, missions that went sideways, operatives who disappeared. And slowly, over years of entries, he began to understand what he was guarding. July 19, 1981. Today I received confirmation that Operation Clear Sky was scrubbed. Official story is it never happened. But I processed $6 million in operational funds for that mission. I know the money went somewhere. I know men died. And now they're telling me to destroy all records. I've started keeping copies. If they're going to bury history, I'm going to make sure someone knows where the bodies are. Marcus's hands shook as he turned the pages. Brennan had been keeping insurance, documentation of every dollar that passed through the facility, every operation he learned about. But he'd never gone public, never blown the whistle. The entries explained why. December 3rd, 1986. They killed Jenkins. Car accident, they said. He was the only other person who knew about the Manila transfers. Coincidence, maybe. But I've been doing this long enough to know there's no such thing as coincidence. I have a wife, 2 daughters. I can't protect this information and them at the same time. So I protect them by staying quiet and protect the information by staying alive. The journal chronicled Brennan's slow isolation. His wife divorced him in 1992, took the daughters and moved to Oregon. He retired from active duty but stayed on as civilian contractor, the only person the agency trusted to maintain the facility. The Cold War ended, but the secrets didn't. Operations shifted from fighting communism to counter-terrorism, from Latin America to the Middle East, but the pattern remained the same. Black budget money flowing into accounts that didn't officially exist, funding missions that would never make it into history books. And then, in 2015, something changed. Brennan met Marcus. August 22, 2015. Pulled a kid out of a burning Humvee today outside Kandahar. Combat engineer, 26 years old, tough as nails. His name's Marcus Hayes. He looked at me while I was dragging him to safety, looked right into my eyes and said, "Thank you, sir." Meant it too. Haven't heard anyone say sir like they meant it in 20 years. Made me think maybe there are still good men in this army. Men who understand honor. The entries after that were sporadic, years between some of them. Brennan's health was failing. He wrote about doctor visits, about medications, about the knowledge that time was running out. And in the final pages, dated just 3 months before his death, he made his decision. January 9th, this year. I'm leaving everything to Marcus Hayes. I've been watching his career from a distance. He got out after his injury, honorable discharge, trying to make it as a civilian, struggling, drinking too much for a while from what I hear. But he's got a kid. He's fighting to be a good father. He's exactly the kind of man who might have the integrity to do what I couldn't. He'll find the bunker. He'll find the money. And maybe, just maybe, he'll have the courage to make them answer for what they did. All those forgotten operations, all those men who died in secret. Someone has to speak for them. Marcus closed the journal and sat in the darkness of the bunker, the lantern casting long shadows on the walls. Brennan hadn't just left him money. He'd left him a mission, a burden, a chance to expose decades of government malfeasance and betrayal, and the weight of it pressed down on him like the tons of earth above his head. He climbed out of the bunker just before dawn, locked everything up, and drove home. Devon was still asleep when he got there, curled under his blankets with his phone charging on the nightstand. Marcus stood in the doorway of his son's room and watched him breathe, watched the gentle rise and fall of his chest, and felt something crack inside. If he did this, if he went public with what he found, everything would change. Devon's life would be upended. They'd be in the spotlight, in danger, in the crosshairs of people who had spent decades making sure these secrets stayed buried. But if he didn't do it, if he just took the money and stayed quiet, then he was no better than the men who'd hidden it in the first place. That afternoon, Marcus called Tyler and asked him to come over. They sat at the kitchen table, Devon at a friend's house, a pot of coffee between them. Marcus slid the journal across the table. "Read it," Marcus said. "All of it." Tyler spent 2 hours reading while Marcus paced the small kitchen, wearing a path in the linoleum. When Tyler finally looked up, his face was pale. "This is insane," Tyler said. "You're talking about exposing CIA black ops, illegal funding, probably murder. These aren't the kind of people who let things like this see daylight." "I know," Marcus said. "And you're thinking about doing it anyway." Brennan trusted me with this. He could have destroyed it, burned everything, let it all disappear. But he didn't. He kept it safe for 40 years and then handed it to me. Tyler leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. "Money like that doesn't stay hidden, Marcus. Someone knows it's out there, and the second you start making noise, they're going to come for you." "Let them come," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Tyler fixed him with a hard stare. "You've got a kid to think about. Devon didn't sign up for this." That hit home. Marcus sat down heavily, the fight draining out of him. "So what do I do? Just take the money and pretend I never saw the rest?" "I don't know," Tyler admitted. "But I know you need to be careful, real careful, because money like that, secrets like that, they have a body count." Over the next week, Marcus started noticing things, small things at first, easy to dismiss as paranoia. A black sedan parked down the street from his duplex, tinted windows, no plates visible. It appeared on Tuesday morning, stayed for 3 hours, then vanished. Showed up again Thursday evening, different spot, same car. Marcus wrote down the description, tried to get a plate number, but the angle was always wrong. His phone started acting strange too. Calls from blocked numbers that disconnected the moment he answered. A weird echo on the line when he talked to Tyler, like someone was listening. He told himself he was being paranoid, that the stress was getting to him, but the army had trained him to trust his instincts. And his instincts were screaming danger. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. On Monday, a man showed up at the house Marcus was working on, a kitchen renovation job that was paying the bills. The man was in his 50s, grey hair cut, military short, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe. He knocked on the door frame of the kitchen, smiled like they were old friends. "Marcus Hayes?" he asked. Marcus set down his drill, wiped his hands on his jeans. "Yeah, who's asking?" "Name's Richard Kelso. I'm with a historical preservation group. We research old military installations, bunkers, that sort of thing. I heard you recently inherited some property out near the border." Every alarm bell in Marcus's head started ringing at once. He kept his face neutral, his voice casual. Where'd you hear that? Kelso shrugged, still smiling. Small town, word travels. We're always looking for sites to potentially document, preserve for future generations. I was wondering if you'd be open to letting us take a look, maybe do some surveying. It's just empty land, Marcus said. Nothing out there but trees. That's what the county records indicate, Kelso agreed. But sometimes there are old structures that aren't on the books. Foundations, bunkers from the Cold War era. You'd be surprised what turns up. Marcus picked up his drill again, making a show of checking the battery. I appreciate the interest, but I'm not really looking to have people tramping around out there. It's private property. Something flickered behind Kelso's eyes just for a second. The smile stayed in place, but it looked painted on now. Of course I understand. If you change your mind, here's my card. He set a business card on the counter. We can be very generous with property owners who cooperate. Consultancy fees, that sort of thing. After Kelso left, Marcus examined the card. It listed a company called Alpine Heritage Research. No address, just a phone number and email. He Googled the name on his phone. Nothing came up. No website, no news articles, no social media presence. The company didn't exist. That night, Marcus sat Devon down in the living room. His son looked worried, picking at a loose thread on the couch cushion. Am I in trouble? Devon asked. Nobody. Nothing like that. Marcus took a breath, chose his words carefully. But I need to talk to you about something. You know how I inherited that land from Colonel Brennan? Devon nodded. Well, there's some complicated stuff going on with it. Legal stuff, boring adult things. But it means there might be some people asking questions, maybe hanging around more than usual. If anyone ever approaches you, anyone you don't know, asking about me or about that property, I need you to tell me right away, okay? Devon's eyes went wide. Are we in danger? Marcus wanted to say no, wanted to reassure him, but he'd never lied to his son, and he wasn't going to start now. I don't know yet, but I promise you I'm going to keep you safe, no matter what. That night, after Devon went to bed, Marcus made a decision. He couldn't do this alone. He needed help, real help, from someone who understood the legal and political minefield he was stepping into. He spent hours researching lawyers who specialized in veteran affairs, whistleblower cases, government accountability. Most of them were in Washington, D.C. or New York, way out of his budget and his comfort zone. Then he found Janet Carraway. She ran a small firm out of Billings, about 4 hours south of Copper Ridge. Her website listed her specialties: military law, veteran advocacy, freedom of information cases. She'd successfully represented 3 whistleblowers in cases against the Department of Defense. One of them was still alive. Marcus sent her an email at 2 a.m, brief and vague. I'm a veteran who's come into possession of information related to classified military operations and substantial assets. I need legal counsel regarding my rights and obligations. He included his phone number and hit send before he could second-guess himself. She called him 6 hours later, before he'd even had his morning coffee. Mr. Hayes, this is Janet Carraway. I got your email. Normally I'd have you come to my office, but something tells me this isn't a normal situation. How fast can you get to Billings? I can be there by this afternoon, Marcus said. Good. Come alone. Bring documentation if you have it, but nothing original. Copies only. And Mr. Hayes, if you're being followed, lose them before you get here. The drive to Billings took 4.5 hours through winding mountain roads. Marcus checked his mirrors constantly, took random turns, doubled back twice. If anyone was tailing him, they were good enough that he couldn't spot them. He arrived at Janet Carraway's office just after 3 p.m. The office was above a Thai restaurant in a strip mall, nothing fancy. Janet herself was in her mid-40s, African-American, wearing jeans and a University of Montana sweatshirt. She had reading glasses perched on top of her head and the kind of direct stare that made Marcus feel like she could see right through him. Sit, she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Talk. Marcus talked for 90 minutes straight. He told her everything, from the letter he'd received to the bunker he'd found, from the $275 million in cash to the classified documents and Brennan's journal. He'd brought copies of key pages, photos of the crates, scans of operation files. He spread them across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. Janet didn't interrupt, didn't react, just listened and took notes. When he finally finished, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally. "First question, have you touched the money?" "No. Well, I counted it, documented it, but I haven't spent any or moved it." "Good. Second question, does anyone else know about this besides your friend Tyler?" "There was a man who came to my work site, said he was with some historical preservation group, but the company doesn't exist. I think someone knows or suspects." Janet nodded slowly, her expression grim. "Mr. Hayes, I'm going to be very direct with you. What you've stumbled into is a political and legal nightmare. That money is legally yours through inheritance, assuming the property transfer is clean and there's no evidence of theft or fraud, but politically you're about to become the most hunted man in America." "What do you mean?" She picked up one of the operation files he'd copied, waved it in the air. "These documents detail illegal activities conducted by elements of the U.S. intelligence community over a span of 40 years. Black budget operations, money laundering, probable assassinations. The people who authorized these operations, who carried them out, who benefited from them, a lot of them are still alive. A lot of them are still in power. Senators, agency directors, military brass, and they have spent decades making sure this stuff stays buried." "So what do I do?" "You have 3 options," Janet said, ticking them off on her fingers. "Option 1, you walk away. Sell the property. Never mention what you found. Let it stay buried. It's the safest choice." "I can't do that," Marcus said immediately. "I know. Option 2, you go public, but quietly. We set up a legal framework, establish a foundation or trust, work with federal prosecutors to turn over the documents in exchange for immunity. It's complicated, takes time, and there's no guarantee you won't still end up as collateral damage." "And option 3? Janet smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Option 3 is you do what Colonel Brennan wanted. You blow the whole thing wide open. We go to the media. We make enough noise that they can't silence you without proving everything you're saying is true. But make no mistake, if you choose that path, your life as you know it is over. You'll be a target, a witness, possibly a defendant in cases that could drag on for years. Your son will grow up in that spotlight. You'll need protection, resources, lawyers you can't afford." Marcus stared at the documents spread across her desk, at the proof of secrets and lies and forgotten men who died in the service of operations their own government erased. He thought about Brennan, alone in that bunker for decades, carrying the weight of knowledge he couldn't share. He thought about Devon, 12 years old and already too familiar with struggle. And he thought about the kind of man he wanted his son to grow up to be. "I want to do it right," Marcus said quietly. "I want to expose what happened. Make sure those men are remembered. Make sure the people responsible answer for it. But I need to protect Devon. That's not negotiable." Janet studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, then here's what we do. We start by establishing your legal claim to the assets and property. We file the proper paperwork, pay the inheritance taxes, make everything above board. At the same time, I start reaching out to federal prosecutors, DOJ, maybe the Intelligence Community Inspector General. We let them know what you have and that you're willing to cooperate. And the media. We hold that card until we need it. It's your insurance policy. If they try to silence you, if they come after you legally or otherwise, we go nuclear. Every news outlet in the country gets copies of those files. How long will all this take? Months, maybe longer, and during that time, you need to be very careful. Whoever sent that man to your work site, they're testing you, seeing how you react. They'll escalate if they think you're a threat." As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Tyler, all caps. "Someone broke into your place." Marcus's blood turned to ice. He showed the screen to Janet. "Go," she said, "but call me when you get there. And Marcus, from now on, document everything. Photos, videos, witnesses. Assume you're being watched." The drive back to Copper Ridge was the longest 4 hours of Marcus's life. He called Devon first, nearly sobbing with relief when his son answered. He was at Tyler's house, safe, had been there since school let out. Tyler had gone to Marcus's duplex to feed the cat and found the door kicked in. When Marcus pulled up to his duplex, sheriff's deputies were already there. The place had been ransacked, not robbed. His TV was still there, his laptop untouched. But every drawer had been pulled out and emptied, every closet torn apart, every box in the garage opened and scattered. They'd been looking for something specific. Deputy Garcia, a woman Marcus knew from Devon's Little League games, took his statement. "Any idea what they were after?" she asked. "No," Marcus lied. "I don't have anything valuable." "Well, they were thorough. You might want to stay somewhere else tonight, just in case they come back." Marcus spent that night at Tyler's house, Devon asleep in the guest room, both men sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "They're escalating," Tyler said. "Kelso was a warning. This was a message." "I know," Marcus said, "but I'm not backing down." "Then you need to be ready for whatever comes next. These people, they don't play fair." At 2:30 in the morning, Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello?" Silence for a beat, then a voice. Male, calm, no accent Marcus could place. The kind of voice you'd hear giving a weather report or reading the news. Pleasant. Empty. "Mr. Hayes, I hope this call finds you well." "Who is this?" "A concerned party. I understand you've recently come into some property, a bunker, very remote, very forgotten, and I understand you've been exploring what's inside." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. "How did you get this number?" "That's not important. What's important is that you understand your position. What you've found, it belongs to a different time, a different world. Bringing it into this world would cause complications, problems for a lot of people, problems for you and yours." "Is that a threat?" The voice didn't change tone, stayed pleasant and empty. "It's an observation. You're a father, Mr. Hayes. You have responsibilities, a son who depends on you. Accidents happen. Break-ins, as you've just experienced. Car troubles, worse things. Or you could make this simple. Walk away from the property, sell it back to the interested parties for a fair price. Live your life in peace. And if I don't?" A pause. "Then we'll have to have more conversations like this one, and neither of us wants that." The line went dead. Marcus sat in Tyler's kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone. His hands were shaking. Tyler was staring at him, eyes wide. "What did they say?" Tyler asked. Marcus set the phone down carefully on the table. "They threatened Devon." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Marcus stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the dark street. The black sedan was parked 3 houses down, headlights off, just sitting there. "They want me scared," Marcus said quietly. "They want me to run." "Maybe you should," Tyler said. "This isn't worth Devon's life." Marcus turned to face his friend. Brennan thought it was. He protected this for 40 years, alone, knowing what it could cost him. And he left it to me because he thought I could finish it. Brennan didn't have a kid, no, but he had people he loved, and he lost them protecting this secret. I'm not going to lose Devon, but I'm not going to let them win either. He pulled out his phone and called Janet Carraway. She answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. "They just called me," Marcus said. "Threatened my son. Broke into my house. They're not hiding anymore." Janet was quiet for a moment. He heard rustling, the sound of her sitting up. Okay, this changes things. We move faster. I'm filing everything tomorrow, making your claim official and public. And I'm calling a friend at the Washington Post. We're going to need media coverage fast before they can make you disappear. How fast? 48 hours. Can you stay safe for 48 hours? Marcus looked at Devon's closed door, at Tyler standing ready to fight beside him, at the black sedan sitting in the darkness outside. I'll do whatever it takes, Marcus said. And somewhere in the Montana night, in a bunker buried beneath 40 acres of forgotten forest, $275 million in Cold War cash sat waiting for one man to decide if the truth was worth the cost, waiting to see if Marcus Hayes was the kind of man who ran from threats or the kind who stood his ground. The clock was ticking, and the real fight was about to begin. Marcus didn't go back to his duplex. By sunrise, he and Devon were packed into his truck heading south toward Billings. Devon sat in the passenger seat, quiet and scared, clutching a backpack with his Xbox controller and 3 days' worth of clothes. He'd asked why they were leaving, and Marcus had given him the only truth he could manage. Because it's not safe right now, buddy, but it will be soon, I promise. Tyler followed in his own truck, armed and watchful. They'd discussed splitting up, making it harder to track them, but Marcus couldn't bear the thought of being separated from his son. Not now, not when men with empty voices were making threats in the middle of the night. They stopped once, at a gas station outside of Butte, and Marcus watched the road behind them while Devon used the bathroom. No black sedans, no obvious tails. But that didn't mean they weren't being followed. Janet Carraway had arranged for them to stay at a safe house, a friend's hunting cabin, an hour outside Billings. The place was off-grid, solar panels and a well, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through dense pine forest. When they arrived, a woman was waiting on the porch. She was in her 60s, grey hair pulled back in a braid, wearing coveralls and work boots. Her name was Margaret, and she shook Marcus's hand with a grip like a vice. "Janet says you're in trouble," Margaret said, her voice matter-of-fact. "You're safe here. No one knows about this place except family." Marcus wanted to thank her, wanted to explain, but the words stuck in his throat. Devon climbed out of the truck, looking small and tired, and Margaret's expression softened immediately. "You hungry, young man?" she asked. Devon nodded. "Well, come on then. I've got venison stew on the stove and fresh bread. Your daddy and his friend can get your bags." That first night, Marcus barely slept. He sat in a wooden chair by the window, Colonel Brennan's journal in his lap, watching the dark tree line for movement that never came. Tyler took the other shift, both of them operating on coffee and adrenaline and the kind of hypervigilance that came from too many deployments in bad places. At 6 in the morning, Janet called. "It's done. I've filed all the paperwork establishing your legal claim to the property and its contents. Inheritance taxes, asset declarations, everything. It's public record now. Anyone who wants to know what you have can look it up." "Is that good or bad?" Marcus asked. "Both. It makes it harder for them to make you disappear quietly, but it also confirms what they suspected. They know you're not walking away." "What's next?" "Next, you meet my friend. Her name is Sarah Chen. She's an investigative journalist with the Washington Post. She's broken stories on government corruption, black site prisons, surveillance programs. She's tough, she's fair, and she doesn't scare easily. I'm sending her your way." "When?" "She's already on a plane. She'll be in Billings by noon." Sarah Chen arrived at the cabin just after 2 in the afternoon, driving a rental car and carrying camera equipment that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. She was in her 30s, Chinese-American, with sharp eyes and the kind of energy that filled a room the moment she entered it. She shook Marcus's hand, nodded to Tyler, then knelt down to Devon's level. "Hey, I'm Sarah. You must be Devon. Your dad's about to help me tell a really important story. You okay with that?" Devon looked at Marcus, then back to Sarah. "Is it going to keep us safe?" Sarah didn't lie to him. Marcus respected that. I hope so. That's part of why we're doing it. They set up in Margaret's living room, cameras on tripods, lights positioned to avoid harsh shadows. Sarah spent an hour just talking to Marcus, no recording, just getting the story straight in her head. She asked sharp questions, pushed back on details, made him clarify dates and numbers. Then she pulled out the camera. Okay, she said, this is going on the record. Everything you say from this point forward can and will be published. You understand that? Yes, Marcus said. Then let's start at the beginning. Tell me about Colonel Richard Brennan. Marcus talked for 3 hours. He told her about Afghanistan, about the day Brennan saved his life. He told her about the letter, the inheritance, the bunker buried beneath 40 acres of Montana wilderness. He described opening the crates, counting the money, reading the classified documents. He read passages from Brennan's journal, his voice breaking on the parts about forgotten men and buried operations. Sarah's camera captured all of it. Then he showed her the evidence. Photographs of the bunker, images of the cash-filled crates, scans of classified documents with operation names and dates. He showed her financial records detailing millions of dollars allocated to missions that officially never happened. He showed her photographs of men whose faces had been crossed out in red marker. Sarah went through everything methodically, taking notes, asking follow-up questions, cross-referencing details. When Marcus mentioned the phone call, the threat against Devon, her expression hardened. Did you record it? She asked. No, I didn't think to. From now on, record everything, every call, every interaction. We need documentation. She interviewed Tyler next, corroborating Marcus's story, confirming the timeline. Then she packed up her equipment and made a phone call, stepping outside onto the porch. Through the window, Marcus watched her pace, gesturing emphatically. When she came back inside, her face was set with determination. My editor wants to run this, she said. Front page, full feature, with supporting documentation published online. But he needs verification from an independent expert, someone who can authenticate the documents and confirm they're actually classified materials. How long will that take? Marcus asked. 48 hours, maybe less. I've already reached out to a former CIA analyst who does this kind of work. If he confirms what we have, we publish on Friday. And if they try to stop us? Sarah smiled, but it was the smile of someone who'd fought these battles before. They'll try. They'll threaten lawsuits, invoke national security, maybe even get a judge to issue an injunction. But by the time they mobilize, the story will already be out there. Once it's published, it can't be unpublished. The truth doesn't go back in the box. That night, Devon fell asleep early, exhausted from stress and uncertainty. Marcus sat with him until his breathing evened out, then joined Tyler and Margaret in the kitchen. Margaret had made coffee, strong and bitter, and they drank it in silence for a while. You know there's no going back from this, Tyler said finally. Once that story publishes, you're committed. No walking away, no changing your mind. I know, Marcus said. And you're okay with that? With Devon growing up in the middle of all this? Marcus thought about his son, sleeping in a strange bed in a cabin in the woods because his father had found something powerful men wanted to stay hidden. He thought about the empty voice on the phone, the casual way it had threatened everything Marcus loved. And he thought about Colonel Brennan, alone for 40 years, protecting a truth no one else had the courage to speak. Brennan spent his whole life guarding this secret because he was afraid of what would happen if it came out, Marcus said. He lost his wife, his daughters, his peace, and in the end, he died alone with the weight of it still on his shoulders. I'm not going to do that to Devon. I'm not going to teach him that the right thing to do is stay quiet when powerful people want silence. Margaret, who'd been listening without comment, spoke up. My husband was in Vietnam, came back different. They told him it was all for nothing, told him to forget what he saw and move on. He died 10 years ago, still trying to forget. Maybe if someone had told the truth back then, told people what really happened, he could have found some peace. She looked at Marcus. You do what you need to do. We'll keep your boy safe. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. Sarah called at 5:30, her voice tight with excitement. It's verified. My expert confirmed everything. The documents are authentic, the operation names match classified programs, the financial records line up with known black budget appropriations from that era. We're publishing in 3 hours. 3 hours, Marcus repeated, his stomach churning. The story goes live on our website at 9 a.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. your time. Print edition hits newsstands tomorrow. I'm sending you the link now. You should probably prepare yourself. This is going to get big. Marcus woke Devon gently, explained that today was the day the story came out, that things might get overwhelming but they were going to be okay. Devon nodded, trying to be brave, and Marcus's heart broke a little watching his son shoulder fear he shouldn't have to carry. At 11 a.m. Mountain Time, Marcus refreshed the Washington Post homepage on Margaret's laptop. The headline appeared, bold and devastating. Forgotten veteran discovers $275 million in secret government bunker, exposes decades of black ops fraud. Below it, Sarah Chen's byline. Below that, Marcus's face photographed in Margaret's living room, looking tired and determined and real. He started reading. Sarah had written it perfectly, leading with the human story. Marcus receiving the letter, finding the bunker, discovering the cash. Then she pivoted to the bigger picture, the classified documents, the operations that never officially existed, the money that disappeared into black budgets and never came out. She quoted from Brennan's journal, shared excerpts from mission files, published photographs of the bunker and the crates, and she'd included Marcus's own words, recorded in that interview. Colonel Brennan didn't leave me money. He left me a responsibility. These men who died in secret operations, who were erased from history, they deserve to be remembered. The American people deserve to know what was done in their name. Within an hour, the story was everywhere. Cable news picked it up, running chyrons that screamed veteran finds fortune in secret bunker and government's hidden millions exposed. Social media exploded. Marcus's phone, which he'd silenced, showed 217 missed calls and 600-plus texts. The story was trending on every platform. By noon, federal agents had arrived at the bunker, not to arrest anyone, Sarah reported in a follow-up article, but to secure the site. The FBI, Treasury Department, and Defense Department all claimed jurisdiction. They cordoned off the property, posted guards, and began their own investigation. Janet called with an update. 3 separate injunctions have been filed trying to seize the property, one from DOJ, one from Treasury, one from a law firm representing unnamed government entities. We're fighting all of them. The good news is the publicity makes it harder for them to just take everything quietly. And the bad news? The bad news is you're about to become the most scrutinized person in America. Every decision you've ever made, every mistake, every parking ticket, it's all going to come out. They're going to try to destroy your credibility. She was right. By evening, the counterattack had begun. Anonymous sources told reporters that Marcus Hayes had a history of alcohol abuse after leaving the service, that he'd been fired from 2 jobs for unreliability, that his ex-wife had left him because of his violent temper. Some of it was true, twisted and exaggerated, but true. Some of it was complete fabrication. It didn't matter. The goal was to paint him as unstable, unreliable, not credible. But something unexpected happened. Other veterans started coming forward, first a dozen, then hundreds, then thousands. They flooded social media with their own stories of being abandoned by the VA, of fighting for benefits, of watching friends die because the system failed them. They shared Marcus's story, defended him, amplified his message. Hashtags appeared. Remember the fallen black budget truth. Hayes has courage. A Vietnam veteran posted a video that went viral. He was in his 70s, wearing his old uniform with ribbons Marcus recognized. "I served in operations that don't exist in any official record," he said, his voice shaking. "I lost friends in places I'm not allowed to name, and when we came home they told us to stay quiet, told us it was classified, told us it didn't matter. Marcus Hayes is doing what we were too afraid to do. He's telling the truth." The support was overwhelming and humbling and terrifying all at once. Marcus read letters that arrived at Janet's office, forwarded in batches. A widow whose husband died after being denied PTSD treatment. A former operative who'd been disavowed by the agency and left to rot. A Gold Star mother whose son died in a mission that was scrubbed from the record. They all thanked him. They all asked him not to stop. One letter came from a woman in Oregon. She didn't sign her name, but Marcus knew who she was the moment he started reading. "You didn't know my father well, but he spoke of you. He said you were one of the good ones. He would be proud of what you're doing. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to support him when he needed it. Please don't make his sacrifice meaningless. Finish what he started. Richard Brennan's daughter." Marcus sat in Margaret's cabin, surrounded by strangers' hopes and the weight of a dead man's legacy, and wept. The congressional hearing was announced on day 4. The Senate Committee on Intelligence and Armed Services would convene a special session to investigate the allegations raised by Marcus Hayes and the Washington Post. Marcus would be required to testify. So would representatives from the FBI, CIA, Defense Department, and Treasury. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, broadcast live on C-SPAN. Janet flew up to Billings to prepare him. They sat at Margaret's kitchen table, and she walked him through what to expect. "They're going to come at you hard," she said. "Some of them will try to discredit you, paint you as a conspiracy theorist or a thief. Others will try to get you to reveal information that could compromise ongoing operations, then charge you with disclosing classified material. How do I protect myself? You stick to the facts. You answer only what's asked. You don't speculate, don't exaggerate, and most importantly, you remind them over and over that you're not the villain here. You didn't create these programs. You didn't hide the money. You didn't erase those men from history. You just found the evidence and did what any citizen should do. You told the truth." They practiced for hours, Janet firing questions at him, poking holes in his answers, teaching him to stay calm under pressure. Tyler watched from the corner, occasionally offering input. "Remember, they want you angry. Angry people make mistakes. Don't give them the satisfaction." Devon sat in the next room, supposedly doing homework, but Marcus knew he was listening. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Devon came to his father's room. "Dad, are you scared?" he asked. Marcus almost lied, almost said no, but he'd promised himself he wouldn't do that. "Yeah, buddy, I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of messing this up, of letting down all the people who are counting on me, of what this might cost us." Devon climbed onto the bed, sat cross-legged facing his father. "Mom used to say you were too stubborn to know when to quit. She wasn't wrong. But Colonel Brennan picked you because you don't quit, right?" Marcus looked at his son, 12 years old and already too wise. "Yeah, I think that's exactly why he picked me." "Then don't quit now," Devon said simply. 2 weeks later, Marcus Hayes stood in front of a Senate committee in Washington, D.C., hand raised, swearing to tell the truth. The chamber was packed with reporters, veterans in uniform, government officials, and curious citizens who'd followed the story. Cameras lined the walls. The air was thick with anticipation. Senator Patricia Morrison, chair of the committee, spoke first. She was a career politician from Virginia, grey hair cut short, reading glasses perched on her nose. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming. I want to start by asking you a simple question. Why did you decide to come forward with this information instead of quietly benefiting from your inheritance?" Marcus looked directly at her, spoke clearly into the microphone. "Because Colonel Brennan asked me to. He spent 40 years protecting a secret that ate away at him. He lost his family because of it, and before he died he trusted me to finish what he couldn't, to make sure the men who died in those operations weren't forgotten, to make sure the American people knew what was done in their name. And the money? $275 million is a substantial sum. Yes, ma'am, it is, but it's not mine. It was stolen from the American people through illegal black budget operations. Colonel Brennan's journal makes that clear. He documented every dollar, every operation. That money should go back to the people it was taken from. Senator Morrison nodded. We've reviewed the documents you provided. Can you explain how you came to possess classified materials? They were in the bunker, ma'am, stored in filing cabinets. Colonel Brennan had been ordered to destroy them when the programs were shut down, but he kept copies. His journal explains why. He believed someone needed to know the truth. Another senator, Thomas Blake from Texas, leaned forward. He had the look of a man who'd already made up his mind and didn't like what he'd decided. Mr. Hayes, you're aware that possessing classified materials without proper clearance is a federal crime? I am, sir, but I inherited them legally as part of Colonel Brennan's estate. I didn't steal them. And the moment I understood what they were, I contacted legal counsel and began the process of turning them over to proper authorities. After you called a newspaper, Blake said, his tone sharp. After I received threats against my family, yes, sir. Men broke into my home. Someone called me in the middle of the night and threatened my son. I needed insurance. I needed the truth public, so I couldn't be quietly disappeared. That landed hard. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Blake sat back, jaw tight. The questioning went on for 4 hours. Some senators were hostile, trying to trap Marcus in contradictions or catch him admitting to crimes. Others were sympathetic, asking him to read from Brennan's journal, to explain the human cost of the operations documented in those files. Through it all, Marcus stayed calm, stayed focused, stuck to the truth. Then Senator Morrison asked the question Marcus had been waiting for. Mr. Hayes, what do you want to happen now? What outcome are you hoping for? Marcus took a breath. This was it. This was his chance. I want 3 things, ma'am. First, I want the men who died in those operations to be officially recognized. They served their country, they gave their lives, and they deserve to be remembered. Second, I want accountability. The people who authorized illegal programs, who misappropriated funds, who covered up the truth, they need to answer for it. And third, I want that money to go where it should have gone in the first place. To veterans who are struggling, to families who lost loved ones, to programs that actually help the people who served. You're proposing to give away $275 million? I'm proposing to return it, ma'am. It was never mine to keep. The chamber erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Senator Morrison gavelled for order, but the moment had already escaped her control. Marcus Hayes, the struggling handyman from Montana, had just offered to give away a fortune to honor the dead and help the living. That night, the video clip played on every news channel. Marcus's words, calm and clear and devastating. It was never mine to keep. The story shifted. It wasn't about scandal anymore. It wasn't about government corruption or black ops or buried secrets. It was about a man who'd found wealth and chosen honor instead. It was about finishing what a better man had started. It was about doing the right thing even when it cost everything. Support poured in from unexpected places. Veterans organizations endorsed Marcus's proposal. Advocacy groups rallied behind the idea of creating a foundation. Even some members of Congress, previously silent, began speaking up in support. The tide was turning. But the fight wasn't over. Powerful people were still in the shadows, still pulling strings, still trying to make this go away. Marcus knew that. But he also knew he wasn't alone anymore. He had Janet and Sarah and Tyler. He had Margaret and Devon and thousands of veterans he'd never met, but who believed in what he was doing. And most of all, he had the truth. Colonel Brennan's journal, the classified documents, the photographs and financial records, evidence that couldn't be erased or denied. Proof that some things mattered more than silence, more than safety, more than survival. As Marcus left the Capitol building that evening, surrounded by reporters and cameras and shouted questions, he thought about Brennan, about the man who'd pulled him from a burning vehicle in Afghanistan, and then, years later, trusted him with a mission more dangerous than any combat deployment. He'd asked Marcus to speak for the men who couldn't speak for themselves, to fight for justice when justice had been buried, to be brave when bravery meant risking everything. Marcus Hayes, 38 years old with a bad knee and a son to protect, was doing exactly that, and he wasn't stopping until the job was done. The settlement came 6 weeks after Marcus testified before Congress. It wasn't quick, it wasn't clean, and it sure as hell wasn't easy. But on a grey morning in late November, Janet Carraway walked into Margaret's cabin with a folder thick enough to stop a bullet and a smile that said they'd won something, even if it wasn't everything. "Sit down," she told Marcus. "This is going to take a while." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had spent countless nights planning his testimony, reading Brennan's journal, trying to figure out how to fight people with more power and resources than he could imagine. Devon was at school, Tyler was at work, and Margaret had stepped outside to give them privacy. It was just Marcus and Janet, and the weight of months of legal warfare finally coming to an end. "Here's what we got," Janet said, opening the folder. First, the government acknowledges that the funds discovered in the bunker were part of previously undisclosed black budget appropriations from 1974 through 1992. They're not admitting wrongdoing, but they're not contesting your legal ownership either. So the money's mine. Legally, yes, you inherited it through proper channels, paid the inheritance taxes, which, by the way, nearly bankrupted you, and you've maintained that it should be used for veteran services. The government agrees with that disposition. Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. What's the catch? The catch is oversight. Any foundation you establish has to be federally monitored. Quarterly audits, annual reports, transparency requirements. They want to make sure every dollar is accounted for and used appropriately. I can live with that. What else? Janet flipped through several pages. Second, Colonel Brennan's service record is being amended. He'll be posthumously recognized for his role in safeguarding classified materials and his dedication to duty. It's not everything, but it's something. And the operations? The men who died? This was the part that mattered most to Marcus. More than the money, more than his own vindication. The men whose names had been crossed out in red marker, whose deaths had been classified, whose families had been told lies or half-truths or nothing at all. Janet's expression softened. The Intelligence Committee has agreed to a review process. Families of personnel who died in classified operations between 1965 and 1995 can petition for recognition. It won't be automatic and it won't be fast, but it's a door that was previously welded shut. You opened it. Marcus felt his eyes burning. He'd known going in that he couldn't save everyone, couldn't undo decades of secrecy and bureaucracy with one testimony. But a door, a chance for families to finally know the truth about how their loved ones died, that was something. "There's more," Janet continued. "Several former intelligence officers have come forward since your testimony. They're willing to provide information about operations, verify records, help with the recognition process. They were waiting for someone to go first to prove it was possible to speak up without disappearing. You gave them that. Anyone I know?" "One of them is Everett Kelso." Marcus jerked his head up. "The guy who came to my work site, the fake historian." Janet nodded. "Turns out he wasn't trying to intimidate you, at least not exactly. He was testing you, seeing if you could be bought or scared off. When you held your ground, he started having second thoughts about his own role in covering things up. He's provided documentation on 3 operations that never made it into Brennan's files." "Marcus, you started a landslide." Over the next month, Marcus worked with Janet and a team of attorneys to establish the Brennan Hayes Foundation. The name had been Devon's idea, combining the man who'd hidden the truth with the man who'd revealed it. They filed incorporation papers, established a board of directors, set up banking relationships, and began the complicated process of transferring $275 million from a bunker in Montana to investment accounts that could sustain the Foundation's mission for decades. The Foundation's stated purpose was simple: to provide support, resources, and recognition to veterans and their families, with special emphasis on those who served in classified or undisclosed operations. Programs would include mental health services, housing assistance, legal aid, job training, educational scholarships, and a memorial project to honor the forgotten fallen. Sarah Chen wrote a follow-up article when the Foundation was officially established, complete with photographs of Marcus signing the incorporation papers, Devon standing beside him. The headline read, "From Bunker to Beacon, Veteran Transforms Fortune into Force for Good." The story detailed how Marcus could have kept the money, could have set himself and his son up for life, but instead chose to honor Colonel Brennan's final wish. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from across the country, people wanting to add to the Foundation's resources. Veterans organizations offered partnerships, corporations offered matching funds. Within 3 months, the Foundation's assets had grown to $300 million, and Marcus found himself managing something far bigger than he'd ever imagined. He hired staff carefully, mostly veterans themselves, people who understood the mission because they'd lived it. Tyler became the director of vocational training, overseeing programs that taught practical skills to veterans transitioning to civilian life. A former Army nurse named Patricia became the healthcare coordinator. A retired JAG officer handled legal services. And Marcus, despite his protests that he was just a mechanic, became the Foundation's director and public face. The first major initiative was establishing treatment centers. Marcus had seen too many friends struggle with PTSD. Too many veterans fall through the cracks because the VA was overwhelmed or underfunded, or just didn't have the resources to help everyone who needed it. The Foundation partnered with mental health professionals to create residential treatment facilities specifically designed for veterans dealing with trauma, addiction, and the invisible wounds of service. The first center opened in Montana, just outside Copper Ridge. It was a converted ranch property, 40 acres of quiet land where veterans could spend 30, 60, or 90 days working through their trauma in a safe environment. They called it Brennan House, and Marcus insisted on being there for the dedication. The day was cold and bright, snow dusting the mountains in the distance. About 200 people showed up, veterans and families and local community members who'd watched Marcus's story unfold. A podium had been set up near the main building, and Marcus stood behind it, looking out at the crowd, feeling wildly out of place in the suit Janet had insisted he wear. He spoke without notes, his voice carrying across the quiet land. 6 months ago, I was fixing leaky faucets and trying to figure out how to pay my electric bill. I never wanted to be here. I never wanted any of this. But Colonel Richard Brennan saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He trusted me with a mission, and that mission was simple: take care of the people who served. Don't let them be forgotten. He paused, looking down at Devon in the front row. His son gave him a thumbs up, and Marcus smiled. This facility exists because of the sacrifice of men and women whose names most of you will never know. They served in places they can't talk about, doing things they're not allowed to describe. Some of them came home broken. Some of them didn't come home at all. This is for them. This is to say, we remember, we honor you, and we're here to help. The crowd erupted in applause. Several veterans in the front row were openly weeping. One man, maybe in his 60s, stood up and saluted. Others joined him, a wave of hands rising to foreheads, holding position. Marcus, who'd been out of uniform for over a decade, found himself standing at attention, returning the salute, his own eyes wet. After the ceremony, people lined up to talk to him. A woman whose husband had died by suicide after coming home from Iraq. A Vietnam vet who'd been homeless for 15 years before getting help. A young Marine who'd lost both legs in Afghanistan and was struggling to find purpose. They all thanked him. They all told him their stories, and Marcus listened to every single one, shaking hands, exchanging phone numbers, promising that the foundation would be there when they needed it. One man waited until everyone else had gone. He was tall in his 70s, with white hair and the kind of bearing that marked him as career military, even in civilian clothes. He approached Marcus cautiously, like he wasn't sure he'd be welcome. "Mr. Hayes, I'm General Robert Sullivan, retired. I need to speak with you privately." Marcus tensed. The name Sullivan had appeared in several of the classified documents associated with operations in Central America during the 1980s. Janet had warned him that some of the people implicated in those files might come looking for him, might try to intimidate or discredit him now that legal channels had failed. "If this is about the Foundation, you can speak with my attorney," Marcus said carefully. Sullivan shook his head. "It's not about that. It's about forgiveness." They walked away from the crowd, down toward a fence line where horses grazed in a nearby pasture. Sullivan was quiet for a long time, just watching the animals move slowly through the grass. Finally, he spoke. "I authorized some of those operations you found documented in Brennan's bunker. Not all of them, but enough. I believed we were doing the right thing, protecting American interests, fighting enemies who didn't play by Geneva Convention rules. And maybe some of it was necessary, but a lot of it wasn't. A lot of it was just men with power making decisions that cost other men their lives." He turned to face Marcus. "I've spent the last 20 years trying to justify what we did, telling myself it was war, it was complicated, it was necessary. But your testimony, reading Brennan's journal, seeing those names and dates laid out so clearly, it broke something open in me. I can't justify it anymore, and I can't take it back. But I can tell you I'm sorry, and I can ask what I can do to help make it right." Marcus studied the old general, looking for deception or manipulation, but all he saw was a man carrying guilt that had aged him beyond his years. "You can tell the truth," Marcus said. "There are families still waiting to know what happened to their sons, their husbands, their fathers. If you have information that can give them closure, give them peace, then tell it. That's how you make it right." Sullivan nodded slowly. "I'll contact your foundation's legal team. I have records, communications, operational details. I'll provide whatever I can." "Why now?" Marcus asked. "You could have stayed quiet. No one was coming after you specifically." "Because I'm dying," Sullivan said simply. "Liver cancer, 6 months, maybe a year. And I realized I didn't want to die the way Brennan did, alone and burdened with secrets. You gave me another option, a way to unburden myself and maybe help someone else in the process." They shook hands and Marcus watched the general walk slowly back to his car. Another ghost stepping into the light, another piece of the truth ready to be told. As winter turned to spring, the foundation expanded rapidly. A second treatment center opened in Texas, a third in North Carolina. Scholarship programs launched at 12 universities, providing full tuition for children of fallen veterans. Legal aid clinics opened in 6 cities, helping veterans fight wrongful benefit denials. Job training programs placed over 400 veterans in skilled positions. The foundation wasn't just spending money, it was changing lives. Marcus traveled constantly, visiting facilities, meeting with veterans, speaking at fundraisers and conferences. He hated the attention, the cameras, the endless questions from reporters, but he understood it was part of the job, part of honoring Brennan's trust. And Devon traveled with him when school allowed, learning about service and sacrifice and the weight of responsibility. One evening in April, they were in Washington, D.C. for a congressional medal ceremony. The medal wasn't for Marcus. He'd made it clear he didn't want personal recognition, but for Colonel Brennan. posthumously awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal for his years safeguarding classified materials and his dedication to duty. Marcus accepted it on Brennan's behalf, and afterward he and Devon visited Arlington National Cemetery. They walked through rows of white headstones, thousands of them, each one marking a life given in service. Marcus had been here before for funerals of friends who didn't make it home, but this time felt different. This time he was looking for one specific grave. They found it in Section 60, a newer part of the cemetery where casualties from Iraq and Afghanistan were laid to rest. Colonel Richard Emmett Brennan. The headstone was simple, regulation issue, but someone had left flowers, fresh ones recently placed. Marcus knelt beside the grave, Devon standing quietly behind him. He pulled the medal from his pocket, the case still sealed, and set it on the grass. "I did what you asked," Marcus said softly. "It wasn't clean, it wasn't perfect, but I did it. The money's being used to help veterans. The operations are being investigated. Some of the men are being recognized. And people know the truth now. They know what you protected all those years." He paused, his throat tight. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were trying to tell me, about service, about duty, about doing the right thing even when it costs everything. You saved my life twice, sir, once in Afghanistan and once when you trusted me with this mission. I hope I did right by you." Devon stepped forward and placed his hand on his father's shoulder. Together they stood in silence, the spring wind moving through the trees, carrying the sound of distant traffic and birdsong and the quiet breath of a nation built on sacrifice. "Dad," Devon said quietly, "do you think he's proud of you?" Marcus thought about that, about the journey from that first letter to this moment, about the threats and the fear and the sleepless nights, about the choice he'd made to speak up instead of staying silent, to fight instead of running, about the foundation that now bore both their names and the lives it was changing every single day. "Yeah," Marcus said, "I think he is." They left the medal there, a small gift for a man who'd given everything and asked for nothing in return. As they walked back through the rows of white stones, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not the weight lifting, it would never fully lift, but settling differently, becoming something he could carry without it crushing him. That night, back at their hotel, Devon did his homework while Marcus reviewed Foundation reports. There was a new proposal for a memorial wall, similar to the Vietnam Memorial, but specifically for veterans of classified operations. Names that had never been publicly honored would be engraved in black granite, finally given the recognition they deserved. The project would cost millions and take years, but Marcus was committed to seeing it through. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. She was working on a 1-year anniversary piece, tracking the impact of Marcus's testimony and the Foundation's work. She wanted to interview him again, get his reflections on how everything had changed. Marcus agreed, and 2 weeks later, he sat across from Sarah in the Foundation's new headquarters, a modest building in Billings that had once been a warehouse. They'd converted it into offices, meeting rooms, and a resource center where veterans could walk in and get help with everything from housing applications to resume writing. "So," Sarah said, camera rolling, "1 year ago you testified before Congress. You exposed government corruption, you turned down a fortune, and you started a foundation that's now helping thousands of veterans. How does it feel?" Marcus laughed, a short, tired sound. "Overwhelming, exhausting, worth it. Do you ever regret it? Ever wish you'd just taken the money and stayed quiet?" He thought about that honestly, giving the question the respect it deserved. "There are days I wish life was simpler, yeah. Days I miss just fixing broken pipes and picking Devon up from school without reporters following us. But regret? No. Colonel Brennan gave me a chance to matter, to make a real difference. How many people get that? How many people get handed $275 million and told to use it to change the world? I couldn't walk away from that. Wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I had. What would you say to Colonel Brennan if you could talk to him now? Marcus looked directly into the camera, his voice steady. I'd say thank you. Thank you for pulling me out of that burning truck. Thank you for trusting me when you didn't have to. Thank you for showing me that one person can make a difference if they're willing to stand up. And I'd tell him that I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure his sacrifice meant something, that the men he protected in those files are remembered, that veterans who come after us know someone's fighting for them. The interview went on for another hour, but that moment, that direct address to a dead man, was what Sarah used as the closing shot of her piece. It went viral again, reminding people why this story mattered, why Marcus Hayes mattered. The Foundation's work continued to expand. By the end of the first year, they'd helped over 5,000 veterans directly through programs and services. Dozens more had found help through partnerships the Foundation had forged with other organizations. And the Memorial Wall project was approved, with construction scheduled to begin on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Marcus hired a sculptor, a veteran himself who'd lost both hands in Fallujah and learned to create art with prosthetics. Together they designed a wall that would eventually hold 10,000 names, men and women who'd died in service to operations that were classified, scrubbed, or simply forgotten. Each name would be researched, verified, and added only after families gave permission. It would take years to complete, but it would stand as a permanent reminder that service in the shadows still counted, still mattered, still deserved honor. The dedication ceremony for the memorial was scheduled for Memorial Day, 2 years after Marcus first opened that bunker. The Foundation had grown to a staff of 47 people, operating in 12 states, with assets that now exceeded $400 million, thanks to continued donations and careful investment. Marcus had gone from handyman to director of a major nonprofit, and some days he still couldn't quite believe it was real. Devon, now 14, had grown into a thoughtful young man who understood the weight of what his father had done. He volunteered at the Foundation after school, helping with mailings and database entry, and occasionally speaking at events about what it was like growing up in the middle of a movement. On Memorial Day, Washington, D.C. was warm and sunny, the mall packed with people who'd come for the dedication. The memorial wall stood gleaming in the sunlight, black granite inscribed with names in silver. The first section was complete, holding 1,237 names. More would be added as research continued, as families came forward, as the truth slowly emerged from decades of classification. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at a crowd of thousands. Veterans, families, politicians, reporters, ordinary citizens who believed in what the Foundation represented. He saw Tyler in the crowd, and Margaret, and Janet Carraway. He saw Sarah Chen with her camera crew. He saw General Sullivan, frail but present, refusing to miss this moment. And in the front row, he saw Devon, sitting beside the daughters of Colonel Richard Brennan, who'd flown in from Oregon to see their father honored. Marcus had met them privately the day before, 2 women in their 50s who'd spent their childhoods wondering why their father was always distant, always preoccupied. He'd given them Brennan's journal, let them read their father's words, understand the burden he'd carried. They'd wept reading it, and then they'd thanked Marcus for finishing what their father had started. Now, standing before the memorial that bore his name alongside Brennan's, Marcus felt the full weight of 2 years of work, 2 years of fighting, 2 years of trying to honor a trust he'd never asked for but had accepted anyway. He began to speak, his voice amplified across the mall. 2 years ago, I received a letter that changed my life. Colonel Richard Brennan, a man who saved me once in Afghanistan, left me an inheritance I didn't understand. 40 acres of Montana wilderness and a collapsed bunker. When I finally broke through that sealed door, I found $275 million and a secret that had been buried for decades. He paused, letting that sink in for the people in the crowd who were hearing the full story for the first time. But that money wasn't the real inheritance. The real inheritance was a mission. Colonel Brennan had spent 40 years protecting the truth about classified operations, about men who died serving their country in ways they couldn't talk about, in places they couldn't name. He protected that truth because he believed someone someday would have the courage to speak it, and he trusted me to be that someone. Marcus looked at the wall, at the names shining in the sun. These men and women gave everything in service to operations most of you will never know about. They died in jungles and deserts and cities whose names are still classified. Their families were told lies or half-truths or nothing at all. They were erased from history because it was convenient, because it was classified, because no one wanted to answer hard questions about what was done in America's name. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. But they're not erased anymore. Every name on this wall represents a life that mattered, a family that deserves truth, a service that deserves honor, and this is just the beginning. We have thousands more names to research, thousands more families to contact, thousands more stories to tell. Because that's what the Brennan Hayes Foundation does. We remember, we honor, we fight for the people who can't fight for themselves anymore. He stepped back from the podium as the crowd rose to its feet, applause washing over him like a wave. But he wasn't done. He walked to the wall, placed his hand on the cool granite, and bowed his head. Around him, others did the same. Veterans touching names of friends they'd lost. Widows finding husbands they'd never been allowed to properly mourn. Children seeing their fathers' names carved in stone for the first time. Devon joined his father at the wall, and together they stood in silence, honoring the fallen, remembering the forgotten. It was everything Brennan had wanted, everything he'd protected for 4 decades, everything he'd trusted Marcus to finish. As the ceremony ended and people began to disperse, Marcus noticed a man standing alone near the edge of the crowd. He was elderly, using a cane, but there was something familiar about him. Marcus walked over, and as he got closer, he recognized the face from one of the photographs in Brennan's bunker. A man standing beside Brennan in front of what looked like an embassy, dated 1983. "You're Marcus Hayes," the man said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "I'm Walter Price. I served with Brennan in Laos, 71 to 74. I heard what you did, what you built. I wanted to thank you in person." Marcus shook his hand carefully. "I'm just finishing what Colonel Brennan started." Walter smiled, sad and knowing. "No, son. You're doing what none of us had the guts to do. We all knew about that bunker, all of us who worked those operations. We knew Brennan was keeping records, keeping money that should have been destroyed. And we were grateful someone was, because it meant the truth wouldn't completely disappear. But we were too scared to help him, too scared to speak up. We thought silence would protect us. It just made us cowards." "You're not a coward for surviving," Marcus said gently. "Maybe not, but I'm also not a hero. You are. You and Brennan. You proved one person can make a difference if they're willing to pay the price." They talked for a while longer, Walter sharing stories about Brennan, about operations they'd run together, about the toll that classified service took on a soul. Eventually, he shook Marcus's hand again and walked away, leaning heavily on his cane, another ghost emerging from the shadows to touch the light one last time. That evening, Marcus and Devon walked along the reflecting pool as the sun set over the monuments. Washington, D.C. was beautiful in the fading light, the marble buildings glowing gold and pink, the water mirror smooth. "Dad," Devon said, "what happens now? I mean, the memorial's dedicated, the foundation's running. What's next?" Marcus thought about that. There was always more to do, more veterans to help, more names to add to the wall, more truth to uncover. The work would never really be finished. But that wasn't what Devon was asking. "Now we keep going," Marcus said. "We help people. We tell stories. We make sure everyone who served knows they matter, that they're not forgotten. and we live our lives knowing we did something that mattered. "Are you happy?" Devon asked. Marcus stopped walking, surprised by the question. Was he happy? 2 years ago he'd been struggling to pay rent, drinking too much, barely holding his life together. Now he ran a foundation worth hundreds of millions, spoke before Congress, had his face on magazine covers. His son was growing up watching him fight for something bigger than himself. Veterans who'd been broken were finding help. Families who'd been lied to were finally getting truth. "Yeah," Marcus said, realizing it was true. "Yeah, buddy, I am." They continued walking until they reached the Lincoln Memorial, climbed the steps, and stood beneath the massive statue. Marcus read the words carved into the wall, the Gettysburg Address, and one phrase jumped out at him: "That these dead shall not have died in vain." That was it. That was the whole mission. Make sure the dead weren't forgotten. Make sure their sacrifice meant something. Make sure the living honored them by being better, doing better, caring more. Marcus Hayes, 39 years old, father, veteran, handyman turned foundation director, had found his purpose. Colonel Brennan had given it to him in a letter and a bunker and a trust that changed everything. And Marcus had accepted it, fought for it, and built something that would outlast both of them. As they walked back to their hotel through the warm Washington night, Marcus felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. The bunker in Montana was now a historical site, maintained by the National Park Service. The money was being used to help thousands. The truth was being told, and Devon was growing up knowing his father was someone who stood for something, who fought for something, who made a difference. Sometimes the greatest inheritances aren't money or property. Sometimes they're missions, responsibilities, chances to matter. Colonel Richard Brennan had given Marcus Hayes exactly that, and Marcus, in turn, had given it to the world. The fight wasn't over. There would always be more veterans who needed help, more families seeking truth, more battles to wage against bureaucracy and indifference. But Marcus wasn't fighting alone anymore. He had a foundation, a team, a movement of people who believed what he believed, that service mattered, that truth mattered, that the forgotten deserved to be remembered. And somewhere, in a grave at Arlington, Marcus liked to think Colonel Brennan was finally at peace. His burden lifted, his mission complete, his trust honored. "Mission accomplished, sir." 3 months after the memorial dedication, Marcus received a letter that reminded him why the work mattered. It came from a woman in Ohio, handwritten on lined notebook paper, the kind kids use in school. Her name was Ellen Martinez, and her husband had died in 1987. Officially, he'd died in a training accident. But Ellen had always known there was more to the story, had spent 35 years wondering what really happened, where he'd really been, why the army wouldn't tell her the truth. Then she'd seen Marcus on television, heard about the memorial wall, read about the foundation's work helping families get answers. She'd submitted a petition for recognition, provided what little documentation she had, and waited. 6 weeks later, the Foundation's research team had found her husband's name in one of the classified files from Brennan's bunker. Master Sergeant Carlos Martinez, killed in action during a covert operation in El Salvador. The mission had been scrubbed from official records, but Brennan had documented it. He'd kept the proof. Ellen's letter thanked Marcus for giving her husband back his honor, for letting her finally know the truth, for proving that his death had meant something. She wrote that she was bringing her grandchildren to the memorial wall to see their grandfather's name carved in stone, to finally be able to grieve him properly. Marcus read the letter 3 times, then filed it carefully in a folder he kept in his office. The folder was thick now, filled with similar letters from widows and children and siblings who'd spent decades not knowing, not understanding, carrying questions that had no answers until Marcus opened that bunker and decided the truth mattered more than his safety. He showed the letter to Devon that evening over dinner, the two of them sitting at their small kitchen table in the house that was finally, truly theirs. Devon read it silently, his young face serious and thoughtful. "That's why we do this," Devon said, handing the letter back. "Not for the big ceremonies or the news articles, for people like her." Marcus looked at his son, amazed as always by his wisdom, his understanding. "When did you get so smart?" Devon grinned. "I learned from the best." Later that night, after Devon had gone to bed, Marcus stood on his porch looking up at the Montana sky. The stars were impossibly bright out here, away from city lights, scattered across the darkness like promises. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the ashes of a burning Humvee in Afghanistan, to a collapsed bunker in the wilderness, to a memorial wall on the National Mall. He thought about all the people who'd helped along the way. Tyler, who'd stood beside him when the threats came. Janet, who'd fought the legal battles he couldn't fight alone. Sarah, who'd told the truth when telling it was dangerous. Margaret, who'd kept Devon safe when safety was anything but guaranteed. And Brennan, always Brennan, the man who'd seen something in a young soldier that the soldier hadn't seen in himself. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Tyler, even though it was late. His friend answered on the second ring. "You okay?" Tyler asked, voice rough with sleep. "Yeah, I'm good. I just wanted to tell you something." "What's that?" "Thank you. For everything. For believing in me when this whole thing started, for helping me dig out that bunker, for standing with me when it got dangerous. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Tyler was quiet for a moment. "You would have found a way. That's who you are, man. You don't quit." "Maybe, but I didn't have to do it alone. That matters." "Yeah," Tyler said softly. "It does." They talked for a few more minutes, making plans for the next training program at the foundation, discussing a new partnership with a university that wanted to offer free counseling services to veterans. Then Marcus hung up and went back to watching the stars. Tomorrow he'd wake up early, drive Devon to school, head to the foundation offices in Billings. There would be meetings about the next treatment center opening in Arizona, calls with families seeking information about lost loved ones, interviews with veterans applying for scholarships. The work never stopped. The mission never ended. But that was okay. Marcus had finally found something worth dedicating his life to, something bigger than survival, bigger than himself. He thought about what he'd tell Brennan if the colonel was standing beside him now. Probably just the simple truth. "I understand now. I understand what you were trying to teach me. That service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. That honor isn't about recognition. It's about doing what's right, even when no one's watching. That one person really can make a difference if they're willing to stand up when everyone else sits down." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and cold mountain air. Marcus breathed it in deep, feeling it fill his lungs, feeling alive in a way he hadn't felt since before Afghanistan, before the injury, before the long, slow slide into despair that had defined so much of his life. But that life was behind him now. Ahead was purpose, meaning, a chance to matter. Ahead was Devon growing up strong and kind and knowing his father had chosen honor over ease. Ahead were thousands of veterans who would find help because one man had refused to stay silent. Ahead was truth carved in granite, names that would never be forgotten, families that would finally have peace. Marcus Hayes stood on his porch in the Montana darkness and smiled. Not because the journey was over, it wasn't, but because he finally understood where it was leading. To a future where forgotten men were remembered, where classified sacrifices were honored, where the truth mattered more than convenience. Colonel Brennan had left him more than money. He'd left him a legacy, and Marcus was going to spend the rest of his life making sure that legacy lived on. Anyone can change the world if they're stubborn enough to stand their ground and brave enough to speak the truth. As the sun rose over Copper Ridge the next morning, Marcus Hayes stood in front of the mirror in his small house, now fully paid off, and looked at the man staring back. Grease no longer stained his hands permanently. The weight behind his eyes had lifted, replaced with purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building. He was leading. He was honoring not just Brennan's legacy, but his own. Devon appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder, ready for school. "Dad, we're gonna be late." Marcus smiled, grabbed his keys, and followed his son out the door. Another day, another chance to help someone who served, another step toward making sure no veteran was ever forgotten again. Because the man who once felt invisible, overlooked and left behind, had become the force that rebuilt hope for thousands. And for Marcus and everyone who stood with him, the road wasn't the end of the story. It was where everything finally began. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth deserves a voice.